There is a fire inside you. You have felt it since your earliest memories, sometimes as warmth, sometimes as a blaze that threatened to consume you. This fire is desire. And here is the truth many men try to bury. You cannot extinguish it. You cannot drown it, starve it, or pretend it isn't there. Every attempt to do so only makes the flame roar louder. The task is not to kill the fire, but to learn how to contain it, to shape it, to make it serve rather than destroy. For many men, this fire becomes a silent war. They burn with shame for wanting too much. They suffocate with guilt for not being able to control it. They feel confused about what their desire says about them, about their power, about their masculinity. Alone at night, scrolling on a glowing screen, or lying beside someone they don't truly love, they whisper to themselves, "Why can't I control this?" But that whisper is born from a false expectation. That desire should be tamed into silence. And so begins the archetypal trap. On one side, repression, the monk who denies, who shuts his body down, who believes holiness means cutting away the flesh. On the other side, indulgence, the hedonist who throws himself into every appetite, who calls his compulsions freedom even as they hollow him out. These two poles, repression and indulgence, are not opposites, but reflections of the same shadow. Both are ruled by desire rather than sovereign over it. Neurobiology confirms what the psyche already knows. Dopamine will rise and desire will follow. It is a wave, a surge, a pulse wired into your nervous system. The illusion of control is where the wound begins. When you believe you should be able to hold back the tide, you condemn yourself every time it washes over you. And so men live in cycles: suppression, eruption, collapse, shame. But what if the task was never to extinguish desire? What if the real work is to alchemize it, to reverse the wound, and let this same fire become fuel for sovereignty? Imagine desire not as a curse, but as raw energy, untamed, yes, but ready to be shaped into strength, clarity, and purpose. This is the shift, from fearing desire to guiding it, from being dragged by it to riding its current. You do not need to kill your fire. You need to learn how to build a hearth around it, so that it warms your house rather than burns it down. Every man who has tried to fight his own desire knows the strange truth. The harder you push it down, the stronger it returns. Repression is often mistaken for strength, but beneath it hides a quieter wound. Many men were raised to believe that wanting is wrong, that lust is sinful, that attraction itself should be buried in silence. But when repression is worn like armor, it often conceals something softer, something much more painful: the fear of rejection, the shame inherited from family, culture, or religion. The body feels the ache of longing, but the mind tells a story that longing itself makes you unworthy. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the part of us that holds everything we refuse to admit. When desire is banished to the shadow, it does not die, it waits. And the more fiercely you deny it, the more powerfully it drives you from beneath the surface. This is shadow possession, the moment when the energy you tried to control begins to control you. It speaks through sudden compulsions, secret habits, late-night clicks on a forbidden website, or obsessions with people who mirror the very qualities you swore you would resist. What makes it so disorienting is the paradox. You think that total abstinence will bring freedom. You think that if you can just cut away the appetite, you'll be at peace. But the opposite happens. The forbidden fruit begins to glow. The more it is denied, the more magnetic it becomes. Desire becomes less about what you actually want and more about the intoxication of what you are not allowed to have. This is why suppression breeds obsession. It creates a double life, where the conscious mind preaches control while the unconscious hungers in secret. The image is simple yet relentless, trying to hold a beach ball underwater. At first, you can press it down with effort. You use both arms, your shoulders strain, your body tenses. But the deeper you push, the stronger the ball fights to rise. And eventually, when your strength fails, it bursts out of the water with even more force than before. This is what happens when you try to bury your desire. The rebound is not just inevitable, it is explosive. Many men blame themselves for this rebound. They believe they are weak, undisciplined, broken. But the pattern is not weakness, it is physics, psychology, biology. What you exile only returns with greater urgency. This is why shame must be separated from the experience of desire. The shame says, "You failed." The reality says, "You are fighting in the wrong direction." And here lies the opening. Instead of endlessly trying to suppress, you begin to notice. Instead of condemning the body, you learn to listen to its language. Patterns start to appear. The same triggers, the same collapses, the same spiral of guilt. When a man steps back and observes his own cycle, he discovers that obsession is not a verdict on his strength. It is a map pointing to where his shadow lives. And once seen, the shadow begins to lose its grip. Desire often feels like an enemy because it arrives not as a gentle invitation but as a wave, a sudden pull that can dominate the mind. Beneath this pull lies one of the simplest yet most misunderstood forces in the human brain: dopamine. We imagine dopamine as pleasure itself, but it is not pleasure. It is the hunger for more. It is anticipation, craving, the restless spark that says, maybe the next click, the next glance, the next touch will finally complete me. Modern life feeds this cycle with precision. Pornography, endless novelty, social media validation, all of these create loops where the brain is rewarded not with deep satisfaction, but with short jolts of pursuit, and the pursuit itself becomes addictive. You are not enslaved by the thing you reach for. You are enslaved by the loop of reaching. The mind begins to wire itself to chase, to expect, to demand stimulation. Hebb's law of neuroplasticity puts it in stark terms. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time the pattern repeats, the circuit grows stronger, until anticipation itself is a prison. This is why men feel trapped, even when they swear off certain habits. They think they are fighting desire itself, but what they are fighting is a circuit burned into the nervous system. And here lies the cruel mirage of control. The more you attempt to fight the urge by sheer will, the more you actually reinforce the cycle. The act of obsessing about not doing something is still giving it energy, still firing the very neurons that sustain the loop. It is like trying to smother a flame by fanning it. What breaks this cycle is not the fantasy of killing dopamine, but the practice of redirecting it. The same spark that fuels compulsion can also fuel creation, discipline, and purpose. The question is not whether dopamine rises, it always will, but where it flows once it rises. Men discover that when the familiar stimulus is cut, even briefly, the nervous system begins to search for a new channel. When that channel is paired with exertion, movement, and creative output, the loop begins to rewire itself. The fire that once consumed them slowly starts to illuminate. This is not abstract. Across communities where men share their struggles, one story repeats: the liberation that comes not from endlessly fighting urges, but from learning to redirect them. Some describe the first 48 hours without the usual stimulus as a storm, restlessness, agitation, emptiness. But then something shifts. The same restless energy that once pulled them toward a screen begins to push them toward action, exercise, writing, building, creating. The current doesn't vanish, it changes direction. The deeper truth is this: desire is not the problem. The problem is a nervous system trained to loop endlessly around crumbs instead of being guided toward substance. When a man learns to understand dopamine not as an enemy, but as raw momentum, he sees through the mirage of control. He realizes he was never weak for having urges. He was simply untrained in where to channel them. And in that realization, the cycle loosens, and a new possibility opens. The possibility of desire as an ally, rather than a jailer. There is a peculiar ache at the center of many men's desire. It feels like destiny, like fate, as if a particular kind of woman carries the key to their completion. But often, what appears as destiny is something much older, more familiar, and more hidden. It is the echo of the mother wound. Many men find themselves drawn again and again to women who resemble, in some shadowed way, the mother who was unavailable, unpredictable, or absent. The pull is not toward the woman herself, but toward the unresolved longing she awakens. It feels magnetic because it is ancient. Jung described this as anima projection, the inner image of the feminine, the soul's muse, cast outward onto another person. When a man meets a woman who carries traits that resonate with his inner anima, she feels larger than life. She becomes a mirror of his own unconscious, and the attraction burns with intensity. But when the mother wound lives inside this projection, what he sees as chemistry is often the reappearance of childhood longing. he does not merely see her. He sees the girl he once wanted to soothe him, the woman he once begged to notice him, the mother he wished would finally be there. This is why certain attractions feel obsessive. They bypass logic. A man may know she is unavailable, unkind, even destructive, yet something in him insists, "I cannot let go." It is not the woman he cannot release. It is the hope that at last, the old story will end differently. The child within him clings to the idea that this time, love will arrive where it never did before. And so he is caught, not in destiny, but in reenactment. Consider the man who feels compelled toward cold, distant partners. He cannot explain why warmth and steadiness bore him, but aloofness intoxicates him. Beneath that intoxication lies repetition, the reenactment of being a boy who reached for a mother's embrace and met only distance. The attraction is not freedom. It is gravity, pulling him back to the wound that was never healed. When this pattern is finally seen, something begins to loosen. The realization dawns that the fire of attraction is not always a signal of alignment, but sometimes the flare of old trauma. To recognize this is not to kill desire, but to see it in its true colors. What feels like fate is often familiarity. What feels like soul connection is sometimes a wound asking to be integrated. This awareness opens the door to choice. When a man sees the projection at work, he no longer confuses the ache of the past with the promise of the present. He begins to separate chemistry from compatibility, destiny from repetition. The anima image remains powerful, but instead of being chained to it unconsciously, he can begin to integrate it, to draw its inspiration without being enslaved by its shadows. The path forward is not to hate desire, but to question its origin, to pause in the heat of attraction and ask, is this pull pointing me toward love or pulling me back to a wound? That quiet question can shift an entire life. For the first time, what felt like destiny reveals itself as a pattern, and once revealed, a man can finally begin to step out of the cycle, carrying with him not only the longing, but also the clarity that transforms longing into strength. Desire, left unchecked, has a way of reducing a man to instinct. It shrinks him into the role of a servant to his urges, rather than master of his energy. In the language of archetypes, this is where many men find themselves trapped, in the imbalance of the lover. The lover is powerful, full of passion, connection, and vitality, but when left without balance, he becomes consumed by his own appetites. Pleasure becomes his compass, and he loses the structure that gives his life direction. Robert Moore described 4 core masculine archetypes: the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. Each carries wisdom and energy that, when integrated, forms a balanced man. But when one dominates without the others, imbalance takes over. The lover without the king becomes lost in longing, addicted to beauty, sensation, and validation. The king without the lover becomes rigid, cold, detached from his own heart. The work of a man is not to kill one archetype, but to integrate them, to let each voice find its rightful place. This is where desire can become destructive or transformative. When it is left wandering without purpose, it consumes. But when it is brought under the rule of the king, it transforms into fuel for mission. The king does not repress desire, he directs it. He takes the raw surge of energy and binds it to vision, to responsibility, to a purpose greater than the appetite itself. This is not about denial, but about sovereignty. Imagine the moment when arousal rises like a tide in the body. Most men are swept away, seeking the quickest release. But under the king's guidance, that same surge can be tethered to action. First, by naming the mission. What is this day for? What is the work? What is the purpose? Then, by channeling the energy into one physical action tied to that mission. It might be movement, creation, or a decisive step toward what matters. And with repetition, the body learns to associate the surge not only with compulsion, but with purpose. Desire begins to serve structure rather than destroy it. The myth of Odysseus offers a vivid picture. When he sailed past the island of the Sirens, whose voices lured men to destruction, he did not silence them or try to block their song. He tied himself to the mast. He created structure stronger than the compulsion. He allowed the desire to exist, but within a frame that preserved his mission. This is the image of the king's sovereignty, not the absence of desire, but the mastery of its direction. When a man shifts from slave of instinct to king of energy, the inner landscape changes. Desire no longer feels like an enemy or a shameful secret. It becomes part of the vitality that drives him forward. The lover is not exiled, but given a seat at the table, ruled by the king's vision. And in that integration, desire is no longer chaos. It becomes order, strength, and fuel for a life lived with depth and intention. In the hidden corners of male psychology, sex often becomes something far more than physical release. It becomes a measure of worth. For many men, conquest is unconsciously equated with validation, proof that they are desirable, powerful, adequate. Behind this equation often lies the father wound, the unspoken sense of inadequacy, the feeling of never being enough, of having to earn dignity rather than inherit it. The body longs for intimacy, but the psyche twists intimacy into currency, a way to purchase a fleeting sense of value. This is why some men chase sexual encounters not out of joy, but out of fear. The fear of being unseen, unchosen, left behind. Sex becomes not about connection, but about confirmation. If I can win her, I matter. And yet, the paradox is cruel. The more a man chases sex for validation, the emptier he becomes. Because what he seeks cannot be found in conquest. It can only be found in sovereignty. Validation, once used as a drug, never satisfies. It demands another dose, another victory, another body to prove the self once again. Psychology names this the Pygmalion effect. We begin to perform the roles expected of us, even when those roles shrink our sovereignty. A man who is expected to prove himself through conquest eventually bends to the role of the conqueror, even when it hollows him. He is no longer living from his essence, but from a script handed down by wounds, culture, and unmet needs. In this performance, he may win many encounters, but he loses himself. The truth is counterintuitive. It is not indulgence that builds respect, but restraint, not repression, but intentional choice. A man who no longer seeks constant validation begins to embody a different energy, one of quiet authority. His presence no longer depends on who desires him, but on the dignity with which he carries himself. And paradoxically, that restraint creates the very respect and magnetism he once tried to buy with conquest. Consider the philosophy of Machiavelli. Power is not held by the one who begs for recognition, but by the one who does not need it. Whoever requires validation loses leverage. In the realm of relationships, the man who depends on sex to feel worthy has already surrendered his sovereignty. But the man who can stand in his own integrity, who can withhold when it serves his deeper purpose, radiates a strength that cannot be taken from him. This does not mean rejecting desire, nor fearing intimacy. It means refusing to make desire into a bargaining chip, refusing to collapse your worth into a fleeting encounter. When sex is no longer currency, it returns to its rightful place, an expression of connection, not a measure of adequacy. And in this shift, a man discovers something he could not find through conquest, the unshakable sense that his worth was never for sale. There is an ancient fear that runs through men, the fear that if they turn away from indulgence, they will become weak, lifeless, and empty. On the other side lies an equal fear, that if they surrender fully to appetite, they will become slaves, consumed, and directionless. Between these two extremes, many remain trapped, believing there is no way out of the polarity. But both fears are born of the same misunderstanding, that sexual energy belongs only to the realm of sex. Biology tells another story. Testosterone and dopamine, the very engines that drive arousal, are also the forces that push men to take risks, to create, to build, to lead. These are not separate energies. They are one and the same. The same fire that floods the body in desire is the fire that drives invention, exploration, and courage. To imagine that sexual energy can only be spent between sheets is to misread the gift at its core. Jung and Freud both spoke of sublimation, the redirection of sexual energy into higher expression. To sublimate is not to deny, but to transform. It is to catch the rising tide and guide it into new channels. Art, innovation, athletic excellence, leadership. When sublimated, the energy that once bound a man in cycles of compulsion becomes the very fuel that liberates him. Picture the moment when arousal grips the body, sudden and overwhelming. Most men rush toward release, chasing the familiar script of temporary relief. But another path opens when that surge is met with redirection. Breath becomes anchor. Movement becomes outlet. Creation becomes the final translation of the energy. The raw charge is not lost. It is transmuted. The fire once feared becomes the forge of strength. Even history offers glimpses of this truth. Nikola Tesla, though extreme in his choices, spoke of celibacy as a way of preserving energy for his inventions. He was flawed, yes, but illustrative. Desire redirected can fuel genius as easily as it fuels indulgence. The key is not in rejecting desire, nor in drowning in it, but in learning to harness it as creative momentum. And this is where the polarity dissolves. Celibacy is not weakness. Indulgence is not freedom. Both are distortions when lived in isolation. The real freedom is found in transmutation, in using the body's natural surges as signals to create, to move, to build. A man who learns this no longer fears his desire, nor worships it. He works with it, shaping it into something that outlives the moment of arousal, something that carries his essence into the world. When desire becomes creativity, compulsion turns to contribution. The same energy that once left him ashamed becomes the current that lifts him into purpose, and in that alchemy, he discovers what was hidden all along. Desire is not an obstacle to sovereignty. It is the very fuel that makes sovereignty possible. Desire has always been described as something wild, dangerous, untamable, but the truth is less dramatic and far more human. Desire is not a monster waiting to devour you. It is a river, and like any river, it has two possibilities. When blocked, it floods and destroys. When guided, it nourishes and sustains life. The mistake is to fight against the river, to believe you can drain it dry or erase its current. The work is to give it a bed, a direction, a channel in which it can flow. Every man who has battled with his own desire knows the chaos of flooding. The dam eventually breaks, the secret habits return, the hidden obsessions resurface. Shame builds, promises are broken, and the cycle begins again. But this cycle is not proof of weakness. It is proof that the river was never meant to be dammed. To block it is to invite collapse. To guide it is to discover strength. Sovereignty does not mean repression. It does not mean abstaining forever, nor indulging without thought. Sovereignty means redirection. It means taking the same current that once dragged you under and steering it toward what truly matters: creation, intimacy, integrity, purpose. The man who redirects his desire stops fearing it. He stops being ashamed of his own body, his own hunger, his own fire. He learns to stand with it, not against it. This is the invitation, to stop asking how to kill your desire and start asking how to make it serve your telos. Telos, the deeper purpose, the direction of your life, the mission that outlasts appetite. When desire flows into telos, it ceases to be compulsion. It becomes devotion. It becomes energy harnessed for the long journey, for the building of something that does not collapse with the passing of one night. The river will always run. You cannot stop it, but you can guide it. You can shape it. You can let it carve valleys of meaning rather than drowning you in cycles of shame. In the end, desire was never the enemy. Misunderstanding was. And once you see desire as the river that finds its bed, you no longer live in fear of it. You live in partnership with it. You walk not as a man at war with himself, but as a man who has learned that his fire, his hunger, his longing were never curses. They were always the very force that could carry him home.